And a very good evening to you tonight. Welcome to our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing the 2018 election cycle in Arkansas. Like most political seasons here in the Natural State, this one features some compelling characters and compelling storylines as well. And how it plays out will, of course, impact all of our futures. So let's talk about it. I'm Chris May, alongside first the man who tops the masthead of the news website talkbusiness.net and the host of Talk Business and Politics, seen every Sunday morning here at 9:30 on KATV. That is, of course, Roby Brock.
Good to be with you.
Are there mastheads on internet websites?
Man,
there should be.
It's all over billboards, all over town,
Yes.
all over the state. I think I'm even on a milk carton somewhere too. So
You deserve it, Roby. So thanks for being here with us tonight. Also, we are pleased to welcome State Representative Vivian Flowers, a Democratic representative from Pine Bluff, serving her second term. She is also the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus and always provides keen political insights. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Glad
A lot to talk about with you as well. And GOP strategist with Little Rock-based impact management group Robert Coon is here as well. He's involved in campaigns, election strategy, and polling for the firm's clients. And again, both of you will help walk us through what should be a very interesting election cycle. Robert, thanks for being here this evening. For the next hour, we will discuss the governor's race, the race for Congress, the constitutional offices, the Supreme Court. I'm sure a whole lot more will come up in the course of this hour. Of course, you're heading to the polls for the primary May 22nd and then the general election on November 6th. If you have questions, we invite you to submit them on the KATV Facebook page tonight. We'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll try to use your questions. Use the hashtag ARPX for Arkansas politics. And, let's just get things going. First of all, it's a mid-cycle election, but we expect this to be a more interesting season than it was at least 4 years ago at this time, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're hearing a lot about the blue wave, and I think that we've seen a trend in a lot of retirements in Congress, but more, I think, interestingly, if you look at the state legislative races in the last year and a couple of months, you've seen an overwhelming number of wins and flips from Republican to Democrat. And I think that what you're seeing is not just a pattern, but just a significant commonality among Americans who are concerned about the country and the direction in which we're going. And a lot of the things that we're seeing, on the national level, we've seen in terms of policy and rhetoric on the state level even before Trump. Mm-hmm. And so now people are kind of wondering, what is that going to mean? What does anything mean anymore when you can't turn on the news and get the truth from the leader of the free world? And I think that's having an effect.
How about that, Robert? Are you concerned about a blue wave?
I'm not necessarily concerned about a blue wave. I think what Arkansas needs to look at or to expect is two things. One, the question is, Trump voters last cycle, a lot of those were new people we didn't expect to necessarily vote, people that haven't voted regularly in the past. I tend to think that some of those people are not going to be consistent moving forward, but that's a theory. We don't know the answer to whether or not they're going to come back or not. Some of them might. Depends on the district, depends on enthusiasm. I will agree with Representative Flowers. I do think there is the potential for some blowback. Obviously, it's very common in midterm elections for the president's party to kind of be depressed a little bit and for the opposition party to kind of have a little bit more excitement. So some of that could be blunted if some of the Trump voters hang around. You could see some greater enthusiasm among Democrats. I think in certain areas, I see the possibility for some Democratic uptick from what they did last time. I'm not totally sold on the blue wave and having it come all the way down to Arkansas yet, but I think in the right districts with the right candidates, I think they could benefit from some backlash.
Barack Obama certainly changed the game during general election cycles, not so much during midterms. It'll be interesting, Roby, to see what kind of impact President Trump has on a first midterm election.
Yeah, I definitely think it will. And what I'm excited about, Chris, is the fact that there's so many candidates that are running this time around. Yeah. In 2016, we just didn't have a very active candidate cycle. There weren't a whole lot of competitive matchups. In Congress, there was only one Republican versus Democrat matchup. And this year, we've got Republican and Democratic primaries, in the congressional races. So there's a lot of House races and a lot of Senate races that'll be competitive and have Republicans and Democrats running against them, too. There'll be libertarians in some of those races and some independents as well. But just the number of candidates that are out there and the amount of election activity that I think we're going to see is what's got me excited, because it's going to make a lot of these races worth covering, and there's going to be a lot of issues and a lot of debate, and it's going to have people pretty ginned up to go out there, and they're going to be motivated to be excited on the Democratic side, excited on the Republican side. I think libertarians are fired up about trying to establish themselves as a political party in this environment. So I'm pretty pumped about the fact that there's just going to be a lot to cover, and that's going to be fun.
Okay, well, before we talk about the races, we have to know the players who were involved. We're going to have Roby on skates tonight, kind of bouncing back and forth. We're going to start with the race for Arkansas governor. Roby, give us a sense for who's involved in that race.
All right, so we've got a Republican primary in this. We've got Governor Asa Hutchinson versus Jan Morgan as the upstart challenger to him on this. Mark West is a libertarian who has been nominated for this race. And we have a Democratic primary too. Jared Henderson, a newcomer on the political scene. Letitia Sanders, a surprise entry. 5 minutes before the filing deadline closed, she showed up and filed for governor as a Democrat too. So a Democratic primary, a Republican primary, and for sure in the general election, we'll have a Republican versus a Democrat matchup with a Libertarian in the race there. So it should be pretty interesting to see what happens in the primaries, which is where I'll throw it back to the roundtable there to think about what's going to happen.
Okay, yeah, what is going to happen? Let's start by talking about the incumbent governor, Asa Hutchinson, veteran politician in the state, popular, not someone as you go into this election who seems especially vulnerable. Would you agree with that, Representative?
Yeah, I think that he doesn't, well, let me go back. I think for a long time up until recently, he not only seemed not especially vulnerable, but Teflon. If I recall, there were a lot of pundits even questioning whether or not a Democrat would emerge and run against him. And then we get one, and not only is he a candidate, but he's a candidate who is running to win. He's not running to make a name. He's got an incredible resume. He's young. And so I think that's one thing, but I think the other thing where the governor is vulnerable is within this, what's now a big tent, where Republicans have not had the big tent before. So you've got sort of some divisions and infighting and people who have not been necessarily happy with some of his middle of the road positions or centrist positions. And out comes Jan Morgan. And so, where he might have been able to run in the middle, he's being pushed really hard, I think, by Jan Morgan to the right, which I think it makes it difficult for him to then come back without a real challenge, and I think that we're going to see that.
Yeah, Jan Morgan, Robert, has called the governor an establishment progressive, which in the GOP I guess is considered a double insult in many ways. Can she make that case? Can she make that stick?
I don't think so. I think the governor is obviously very popular. I think 15 to 20 years ago, I think if anybody called Asa Hutchinson anything other than conservative, I don't remember the words you used, but they would have been laughed out of the room. I think obviously there's a constituency that wants to continue to move farther to the right. I think Asa Hutchinson's a well-established conservative. I do think that he's very pragmatic, but I don't think that you have to be a centrist to be pragmatic. I think you can be pragmatic and be conservative and think through issues and try to find solutions. So, I think he's doesn't have any issue. I mean, iron sharpens iron. He might prefer that there not be a battle in the primary, but at the end of the day, I think he comes out stronger, better, and I think the Democrats having a primary on their side occupies them a little bit, but I still think he emerges out of the primary really as a clear front runner with no issue.
I would say too, I feel like the governor will get criticized for not being conservative enough, but he's got a pretty good war chest. And when he lays down a couple $100,000 to remind people that he supports the death penalty and brought executions back for the first time in over a decade, and that he cut taxes twice, and that he's created jobs, and that he's pro-life, I think it's going to shore up his conservative bona fides with some people that may have forgotten that he is as conservative as, oh yeah, I forgot about those things. People don't have a particularly long attention span sometimes in politics. They forget things. But I think Jan Morgan will definitely represent the part of the Republican Party that is not satisfied with Asa Hutchinson being conservative enough. It'll be curious to me to see how big that percentage is.
How about Jared Henderson? I've talked to Democrats, Robert, who do feel like this is kind of a young, new face in the Democratic Party in Arkansas. Could be the future of this party. What's your assessment of his candidacy?
You know, I can't really say that I disagree with, his opportunity to make a name for himself in the process. I mean, I don't know that he's going to be ultimately very competitive at the ballot box, but, you kind of had a similar situation, I think, with Connor Eldridge, when he ran. There's an opportunity to establish yourself, become a leader in the party. I do believe that politics ebbs and flows, and I think there's certainly value in people, but, inserting their brand, becoming relevant, because I think there could be opportunity down the road. I don't think Jared's opportunity is now, but it doesn't mean it's not 5-10 years from now where there's an opportunity where the electorate is more receptive to move in that direction. So, I mean, it could be a good thing for him personally and could be a good thing for the party or even Letitia Sanders. I don't know much about her. She surprised me. I think she surprised a lot of people, but just because you're not the right choice now doesn't mean you're never going to be the right choice to the electorate.
So, that's right. He ran 4 times for statewide office, and before he got in there.
Spoken like a true pollster.
Hey, there you go.
Now, I have seen Jared Henderson described as a moderate by some people. How does that play in Pine Bluff, for instance?
So I think what plays in Pine Bluff has less to do with labels and more to do with positions, more to do with leadership. And I think for Pine Bluff, when a candidate emerges and is someone who values and sort of puts his money where his mouth is, or her money where her mouth is, as it relates to education and healthcare and opportunities for entrepreneurship, jobs in Southeast Arkansas and rural Arkansas. I think those are the kinds of things that people in Pine Bluff, I know, will be responsive to and have been responsive to in the past.
When it comes to back to Jan Morgan for a moment, she's made her name on cable news. She's had a lot of coverage with the gun-free or the Muslim-free gun zone that she owns. Are these going to be issues that are going to impact her candidacy, or are these issues that propel her candidacy and make her someone who can run in Arkansas?
Well, they excite that portion of the base. There's a base of the Republican Party that responds to that. That's why you see Donald Trump at the national level frequently throw red meat to his 35% that he's getting in the polls there. And I think that Jan Morgan is probably just trying to fuel that energy and enthusiasm for her candidacy with people that she knows that she already has. The problem is she's got to get more than that to win a Republican primary, and so it's going to be tough to do that just going around and doing personal stops all around the state. You got to raise some money and be able to get up on TV.
Right.
She'll get votes. I mean, Curtis Coleman got votes. I mean, she'll get a certain percentage of the electorate that's just dissatisfied, and that happens. And I don't think anybody, running for office like the governor or anybody else should expect that they're going to get everybody, because you never will. Right. I do think that, she's out there taking advantage of the opportunity to talk about what she thinks and what she prefers and things that she should be in place. I do think the governor has an opportunity to talk about things that he's done to actually move forward on his principles and on his objectives. And I think that's going to be a difference for voters, where he can back up and say, here are my accomplishments that fit within this conservative, approach to policy and approach to government, whereas she's just talking about kind of the big picture, philosophical aspect. And I think that you kind of lose that argument.
I think that the second problem is not so much, will she win, how many votes will she get, is what kind of impact is she going to have on the party during the primary and even subsequent to the primary, and what is that going to mean for voters who sort of, jumped on the Trump bandwagon in Arkansas. I mean, he carried the state, and, people saw him as someone who was shticky and spirited and didn't take all the negative and racist things he said seriously, because they were listening to this other part where he was, promoting himself as someone who loves freedom and will do all of these things according to conservatism.
Free world,
right.
So.
But now that image has not really panned out, and people are afraid, people are embarrassed, and the same, I guess independents and moderate Republicans who quietly didn't mind being associated with Trump are expressing regret for voting for him. And so when we look at what she could do to the party and what that will mean in the general election, I think that's more of a consideration, particularly, again, in a state where you've had 39, even though they're legislative races, that's those same people voting gubernatorial races. So you've had 39 legislative races that have flipped since the 2016 election from Republican to Democrat. And in that same time, you've had 4 flip from Democrat to Republican.
Those are all special general elections too, and so there's a bigger voting electorate when that happens.
But I'm just talking about the
Right.
pattern, because that's a pretty significant jump. And so when you're trying to figure out what the pulse is, and then here you've got, you know, the voice of someone who's changing the narrative, changing the subject matter, using social media, using her guns, her shtick, her, you know, what many people would think are offensive things. It just changes, I think, how people may see the party, how people may see that agenda in an environment where we're seeing a lot of movement from Republican to Democrat.
We'll have a chance to see how that, if we see what's happened in other states, like you're talking about. In Arkansas, there's two special elections coming up with a Republican and Democrat, one in Russellville, one in Cabot. So we'll see if the Democrats can win that one. I think the money's on the Republicans at this point in time, but we'll see.
We'll wrap this up. But there are a lot of Second Amendment-driven voters in Arkansas. Is there a huge universe between Jan Morgan and Governor Hutchinson when it comes to guns?
I don't think so. I think Asa Hutchinson's a pretty strong Second Amendment supporter. In fact, if I recall, he had a consultancy arrangement or some sort of policy advisor for the NRA at some point. So I mean,
Newtown.
Yeah, it kind of goes to that whole idea of, you know, in the past, if somebody would say he's not conservative, I mean, that just wouldn't make any sense. And you've got somebody that just, you know, happens to be a little bit further out there that's now looking that direction. But I mean, I don't think he's anywhere near where she wants to intimate that he is. I mean, I think he looks for sensible solutions to problems, but I mean, there's no question in my mind. There's no softness or weakness on the Second Amendment.
Okay, we've got 4 Jan Morgan voters right here just in our last 2 questions, so they are out there. We know that for sure. The Libertarian in the race, Mark West, he has talked about that he thinks that there is a never Asa group of voters in the state. Do we see any evidence of that?
I think I'm glad to see the Libertarian Party trying to offer an alternative out there, and I think they have grown over the last couple of cycles here. They've pushed for more and more candidates. I think that's good. But until they start making a difference in those general elections, they're not going to be viable at that point in time. So I mean, they've got, you know, they're a young political party in terms of Arkansas politics, and for people looking for a third wave per se, I think they got to get out there and start speaking their message a little bit more and hope that it resonates with the voters.
Yeah. You know, he pulled 23% of the vote running in the 3rd congressional district a couple of years ago. No Democrat on the ballot.
No Democrat. So that was just an opposition.
And I think that's the key for them. I'm not a libertarian strategist, but if I was, I would say focus on the areas where you got the head-to-head and try to make some headway there. I mean, we were talking before this started. You know, I don't know that there's been, at least that I remember, there may have been one. I don't want to say this declaratively, but I don't know of a libertarian member of the legislature. Right, that we've had, even at least not in
Green Party.
We've had Green twice, but I don't know of a Libertarian one. But that would be where you make a name. Just think about where the bar is to all of a sudden establish yourself. Yeah. It's not pulling 6% in a statewide race. I don't think that accomplishes anything. For me, that opportunity is: do you pick somebody off that's not expecting it at the state legislative level, at a county-wide level, or something like that? I think then all of a sudden you've got something
even
to crow
a JP level there, sort of. And I think, too, for the Libertarians, they have to go collect signatures to qualify as a political party every year. If they would get 3% of the vote in this governor's race, they don't have to do that. They automatically qualify. And so I think that's the bar for Mark West to try to clear. But, I mean, again, if he's got a message that is not Asa and is not whoever the Democratic or Jan or whoever it is on the Republican or the Democratic side, then it's up to them to kind of communicate it.
Letitia Sanders seems to be, you know, the classic citizen candidate, a hairdresser from Maumelle, hopping in this race. But is Jared Henderson? He's going to be the nominee. He's going to emerge from this primary.
I think so. I mean, I think for everything that politics is, and what it means for people to see new faces and bring about the energy, that's one thing. But when you talk about being able to address the kinds of issues that the governor in the state of Arkansas would need to address, I think that without the kind of funding and the kind of experience that's necessary, it would be a hard sell. But I think that what she brings to the table is what a lot of people are wanting to see, and that's to see an unencumbered voice and to see themselves and to see the average person speak to the issues that maybe they feel have not always been addressed and spoken to in the way that they wanted them. And actually, I think both candidates bring that. They're not establishment candidates, you know, and people who have been in politics a long time and darlings, you know, of lobbyists and that kind of thing. And so I think that kind of freshness is permeating throughout the Democratic ticket and the Democratic race for governor.
Okay. We want to move on to some other races. Let's see who else we're talking about. Let's start with the lieutenant governor's race.
Yeah, we've got 6 other constitutional officers that will be up this time around, and they're all statewide races. Incumbent Republican Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin going to be challenged by Democrat Anthony Bland, who was looking at the Secretary of State's race but switched into the Lieutenant Governor's race. And Frank Gilbert, the Libertarian candidate here, he's run for the U.S. Senate and for Arkansas Governor as a Libertarian candidate before, so he's not going to be a stranger to the stage. Attorney General Leslie Rutledge is the Republican incumbent. She got a last-minute opponent in Democrat Mike Lee for the Attorney General's race. He was looking at a state representative's race, and he switched to the Attorney General's race on one of the last days of filing there. And then Kerry Hicks is the Libertarian Attorney General candidate. Secretary of State. This one's an interesting one to me because I want to get the panel's description of this. This is an open seat. Mark Martin's term limited, so he can't run for Secretary of State again. So you got 2 Republicans here, State Representative Trevor Drown and Commissioner of State Lands John Thurston, who has held that seat for the last 7 years. In a Republican primary, Susan Inman, who's got a lot of election experience in Pulaski County and has looked at this race before as the Democratic nominee, and Christopher Olson running as the Libertarian here. I'll be curious to see what happens with that Secretary of State's race. Auditor State and Treasurer State, which will be our next one. You've got a Republican incumbent against a Libertarian. You got Andrea Lee versus David Dinwiddie, the Libertarian. Dennis Milligan, the Republican Treasurer, versus Ashley Ewald, the Libertarian candidate. And then lastly, we've got the Commissioner of State Lands, a guy named Tommy Land. We could have another Mark Martin versus Pat O'Brien kind of thing going here. Land for Land Commissioner may work out there. He's the Republican person who's filed for that office. Larry Williams, former county judge down in Garland County, is running as the Democrat, and TJ Campbell, the Libertarian candidate in that race. So back to you guys for whatever you think is the most interesting part of the statewide constitution.
I don't think there are any shortages of interesting races when it comes to the constitutional offices. Let's start first with Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, the incumbent. He's raised more than $500,000 for this race so far. Is he looking beyond this office at this point and maybe to the corner office, you think?
I'm thinking so.
I think Tim Griffin uses this opportunity, like, you know, being Southern Cal playing the Razorbacks back in like 2007, where it's just we're going to go out and we're going to win 70-7, and it's just it's a beatdown. I mean, I think he relishes the opportunity. I mean, nobody likes to be opposed, but if you have an opportunity to get out there and spike the ball, I think he views it that way. Or, I mean, he needs to run competitively and demonstrate his strength, but I think he views it as an opportunity to demonstrate his strength. So, and it's an opportunity to show people what he can do leading into even 4 years from now.
Attorney General, a post that is not only significant in its own right, it served as a springboard in the past for candidates in Arkansas. Leslie Rutledge is the incumbent. She's kept a very high profile in the state since being sworn in 2015. How well positioned is she going into a re-election campaign? You're not a fan, I'm guessing.
I think that, let me say this, because I really want to answer in a way that speaks to the race and not my, political leanings.
Sure.
I think that she has done a good job of traveling the state and doing Arkansas politics, but I do think that juxtaposing that with her high profile and might have her thinking that maybe she's in a better position than she really is. Because with all of that, then you've got the actual work of the Attorney General's office as, you know, a centerpiece of what I imagine will be the discussion about the discussions and the debates in that race. And then I think the overarching sort of issue for all of the statewide races goes back to what I'm going to keep talking about the blue wave. And I'm saying that because you're not only seeing some changes with regard to in the national landscape, but even in terms of having new candidates and what that does to bring other people to the polls and vote down ballot. I mean, you're going to see in areas where you see a lot of teachers on the ballot. You're seeing more union workers on the ballot to address some of those issues. So in a state where we're looking at jobs and some of the meat and potatoes, Main Street issues, I just think that that's going to affect her race as well as a formidable opponent who will be able to probably use that high profile against her, as well as issues regarding the actual work of the AG's office.
Well, Mike Lee is he's a serious guy. He had planned to run for the legislature and then changed to hop into this race. He's a lawyer, semi-retired engineer. He criticized the Attorney General for pushing for the death penalty for those 8 death row inmates last year, 4 of whom were eventually put to death. She has, what, $375,000 in the bank, though, so she goes in with a considerable advantage over him. Yeah,
I think Representative Flowers said, I mean, she does a good job of getting out all across the state. She does a good job relating with Arkansans and being active.
I didn't say that.
Well, I said that.
We'll add that.
And she's also well-funded. I think when you talk about some of the issues, and we might all disagree personally, but I think when you look at the aggregate numbers of the Arkansans as far as the death penalty and also on the pro-life side, I think that they identify with her. So, I mean, I think that it would take kind of an unforeseen wave that I don't see in order to bring on a serious challenge for her this cycle.
I would say in line with what Robert's saying about her politics, that she kind of has, it's her natural, it's her DNA, but I mean, she's a conservative candidate, and so her positions are very conservative, and she hasn't done anything scandalous as Attorney General. Usually you vote someone out of office because they've done something that is egregious or a mistake, or they did something that they spent money they shouldn't have spent, or there's a variety of reasons why people get booted out of office. And she's really played her politics pretty conservatively when she's filed lawsuits against the federal government to stop things like the Clean Energy Plan, and those are things that are popular with conservatives. And there's more conservatives than liberals in Arkansas right now.
And I think that her office, whether or not you agree with all the positions that she's taken on all the issues, I think they've been largely pretty effective.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that she's vulnerable in a sense that they're not doing anything, they're not doing their job, they're not doing anything right. I think they're doing a lot right as far as winning arguments and winning cases and judgments against people.
They don't miss deadlines.
Yeah,
I mean,
think
those are some criticisms of the past.
Right, there's competence there. If she
we
can,
don't know about her credit card spending yet, though. So,
well, are we breaking news tonight?
Yeah.
If she can win the second term, what does the future then look like for Leslie Rutledge?
Wow, I've told people that I kind of feel like she's got a lot of options. She will have, if she wins this cycle, she'll have won statewide 2 times. Currently, I assume she lives in the 2nd congressional district. She's got family from the 1st congressional district. She could run for Congress here if there was an opening. She could run up in the 1st district if there was an opening. She could look at a statewide Senate race, or if one of the congressional folks moves. I think she walks away with a lot of different options.
Well, I think the scuttlebutt, too, is that she and Tim Griffin may be on a collision course running for the Republican nomination for governor 4 years from now if everybody still wins their elections this time around. Or she could move to Pine Bluff and run against Vivian Flowers.
Oh,
She could move to,
bring it on.
Well, the gauntlet has been thrown down. Let's talk about that Secretary of State's race now, which, as you said, Roby, should be very interesting. Mark Martin, term limited, so it's a wide open seat. Vivian, the Democrats running Susan Inman, who ran against Martin in 2014, got 35% of the vote then. She's got an impressive resume. She was Director of Elections for Sharon Priest when she was Secretary of State, Pulaski County Elections Director for 13 years. How do you assess her candidacy?
I mean, she's clearly the most qualified and experienced for that role, and she's done this before in terms of running the race. And I think earlier we were talking about, how people can come back from losing elections. We know our governor right now, ran and lost before he won. So I think the significant thing, though, about Susan running now is she ran before during a time when there was an incredible backlash related to President Barack Obama, and that is not the factor now for races in Arkansas. And so I think that, where we have experienced candidates like Susan, you're going to see people respond to that versus voting passions and misinformation and sort of national, national trends. And as a matter of fact, if there are national trends that affect the race, I think that helps her as well.
One of your colleagues, State Representative Trevor Drown from Dover, running on the GOP ticket. Land Commissioner John Thurston, who's term limited, also running from this race. What should we expect out of that primary?
I think you've got two good Republican candidates in that race. It's kind of unfortunate that they're running against each other. I think John Thurston obviously has done a good job in the Land Commissioner's office. He's been reelected there. He's run statewide on pretty trim budgets, which says something to his ability of getting out amongst the people.
Quietly efficient.
Very, very efficient. You never hear anything negative going on over there, and everybody seems to feel like that office is run well. I think that bodes well if he's a Secretary of State candidate. I think Trevor Drown also is a respected member of the legislature. I think he's personable. I think he's respected over there. I think he's got something to bring to the race too. I'll agree with Vivian. I think that Susan Inman's a good candidate, and she can certainly come talk about the experience that she has that fits that job really well. To me, when you look at that map, and I think you alluded to that, she's one of the strong candidates I think that the Democrats have filed in these statewide offices. And I'm not going to necessarily make a prediction there or say that it trends one way or not, but I do think that she's a good candidate. She's a good candidate for that specific race. And Republicans are going to have to compete against each other, and then they're going to have to, unite after the primary to be united against somebody who I think's got a good.
I'll say this about that race too: Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Governor are the three-person board of apportionment that will redistrict Arkansas's legislative seats in 2020. So they'll be the office holders at that time. So if it's a Republicans are going to probably get their way with redistricting. If it's a Republican Democrat, they're still going to get their way. If it's two Democrats and one Republican, then the Democrats will get their way. So those are kind of some high stakes for those three particular races.
For sure.
So who emerges from this Republican primary?
Too early to call.
Yeah, I want to see them put some
I haven't
stuff
seen any
up.
money be spent yet, so
I don't think either one of them's got tremendous name ID at this point in time, even though John Thurston's been on the ballot and has, and Susan Inman's been on the ballot. The residue from those races, it dissipates pretty quickly.
But I do think winning twice statewide, I think Thurston has a little bit broader name ID, obviously, having run statewide twice, than anybody that's in the legislature is going to have outside of their footprint. I mean, I think there's some natural advantage there. I don't know that it's a lot, but I think there's some, just on the name ID.
Okay, other constitutional offices we talked about: auditor, treasurer, land commissioner. In a state dominated by Republicans, are there opportunities in those races for a change in a constitutional office that maybe a Democrat can take over? Where do you see it happening if it does?
I think it's about name ID, and one of the most interesting land commissioner races we've ever had in Arkansas, believe it or not, was I think in 1980. Larry Crane, who's the Pulaski County Pulaski County clerk who's retiring, was running for the Democratic nomination against a guy named Charlie Daniels.
Yes.
And that year was the year that The Devil Went Down to Georgia became the mega country hit that it was.
Wow.
And Larry tells the story of everywhere we went, The Devil Went Down to Georgia by Charlie Daniels Band was playing, and everybody thought that was who Charlie Daniels was. So name ID can go a long way. Look at Mark Martin versus Pat O'Brien in 2010. I mean, so sometimes just name ID can sometimes really be the difference in those down ballot races. Just, I recognize that name.
First reaction, got that one.
Tommy Lando, he's never run for office. He's been involved in GOP party politics in the 1st District, so first timer.
Yeah, I think they're all going to be newbies in that race.
Right.
So.
Dennis Milligan, of course, he's had his share of headlines over the course of this last term. Channel 7 took him to task over spending in his office, which landed him in front of the Ethics Commission. He had a lawsuit with a former employee. How will those headlines, or will they, impact this race?
Who wants to jump in? I'll jump in. I don't mind. So, I mean, look, I think he's put a lot of that past him, to be honest with you. You haven't heard from those missteps in a couple of years. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the Democrats had a problem trying to field someone to run against him.
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
And that is a good question, though. Why isn't there a Democrat candidate in this race? If you have that hanging
so I
out
do
there.
know that there were people considering it, and I think that for those two races, it was a matter of people making a decision based on their personal lives and feeling like it was the right time. And so I think that can happen. And I think so. I don't know if it's more. As a matter of fact, no, it's not about Democrats fielding a candidate. You can have someone who makes a decision, and I know we'll talk about this later. For example, Representative Clark Tucker, everyone was waiting. What is he going to run for? What is he going to run for? And for a while there, he was out of commission for thinking about politics because people didn't know that he was going through cancer.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of things that we don't think about when we're sort of kicking this football around and talking about politics. But I don't know what the reasons were, but there were people who were considering it, and this is just sort of how it fell out in the wash. And I think, at a time where everyone is believing and thinking, and has for a while, that Arkansas will be under Republican, rule for the next 100 years like it was for Democrats. Well, the reality is when this was a Democratic state, Republicans and Democrats were Democrats. And right now, there are people who are serving as Democrats who are really Republican. I mean, who are serving as Republicans who are really Democrats. Mm-hmm. People run when they think they can win. And then people also have to make a decision because it's a huge decision and it's a lot of work campaigning, and then you got to lead.
A lot of sacrifice.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Which you know about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, Roby, if you want to go back to the board, but this is my favorite graphic of the night, and I think you'll know why almost immediately when you see it.
All right, let's go through the congressional districts here. We've got District 1. Incumbent Republican Rick Crawford is running for another term. Democratic challenger, newcomer on the scene, Chinton Desai, is also into the race right here. And then the Libertarian candidate running again for office, Elvis Presley. And Elvis is truly everywhere. He's run a couple of times for some different races. And I do love the candidate shot right there. So that one's kind of set for November already. If we go to the 2nd congressional district, this one's the crowded field right here. We've got incumbent Republican French Hill. He did not get any Republican opposition here, but there are 4 Democrats running in this race. Paul Spencer, Gwen Combs, Clark Tucker, state representative, Jonathan Dunkley, newcomer to the political scene in that as well. Libertarian candidate Joe Swofford, and then Natasha Birch-Holsey is running as an independent. And this maybe a write-in, as a matter of fact. I think that's what she's pursuing right there. But the big race here in the 2nd district will be this Democratic primary right here. There will be a lot of action on that, and we'll talk about that when the roundtable picks this one back up. In the 3rd congressional district, we've got Republican Steve Womack as the incumbent. He actually fielded a Republican challenger, Rob Ryersey, who was a little to the liberal side of Congressman Womack there. So he's got some positions that are less conservative than Congressman Womack. Josh Mahoney is the Democratic candidate that will emerge from the 3rd congressional district. And then Michael Galagias is the Libertarian candidate in the race there. So we've got a Republican primary in District 3. We also have a Republican primary in District 4. Incumbent Republican Bruce Westerman is the current U.S. Representative. Randy Caldwell surprised everyone. He's from Hot Springs Village. We don't know a whole lot about him. He filed on the first day of filing as a challenger to Representative Westerman. You've got Democrat Hayden Schammel in here. She's kind of really created a lot of buzz with some of her candidacy, newcomer on the scene in some respects. She's been doing a lot of local politics. And then you've got independents Lee McQueen, Michael Barrett, and Libertarian Tom Canada there. So this is the Republican primary, just like the 3rd district, and then the Democrats in the 2nd district have the real crowded primary. So all of that to say, we got a lot of primary action in the congressional districts before we get to the general election. So let's chew on that.
Okay, a lot to talk about with that, Roby. Thanks. We should mention Roby is playing hurt, by the way. He's got a bit of a cough, but he's been working hard and pushing through, so we appreciate that. Allergies. We sure do appreciate it there, Roby.
Keep your distance.
We would not be here. Okay, so the first congressional district race spawned my favorite headline of the year, which is Elvis Presley running for Congress and the ballots all shook up. I loved that. That worked for me. Rick Crawford in the 1st district, conservative guy. How would you assess his standing with voters in East Arkansas?
I think it's really strong. I think Rick's in a good position. I think he identifies well. I think he does a good job getting back. I think his staff does a good job helping with issues over there, and he's certainly in tune with a lot of the local issues. I am a little disappointed in the headshot. I mean, he has a really nice beard, and I'm kind of like beards, so there's no beard on that picture. We got to get a bearded Rick Crawford back up. That would help him even more with the duck hunters and everybody over there. So.
All right, we'll have to update that. Chintan Desai has got an incredible story. The son of Indian immigrants. He moved to Helena 8 years ago to teach 5th graders and help open a community center. He's out there talking about things like affordable health care, education. This seems to be a true conservative versus progressive race here.
And I think when it comes to these congressional races, and really across the board, the races, but especially congressional races, you're going to see turnout be an incredible factor, but also, you know, I think in the past you've had Democratic candidates, particularly in the past, who are competing, trying to sound like the best Democratic Republican, or if I'm saying that right, or having the best conservative Democrat. Right. And I think this will be a true test where you have very clear, divergent perspectives, and at a time when, you know, I think you're going to see people being challenged in their lives as it relates to the Affordable Care Act, because the reality is we live in a very poor state. We have 3% unemployment, but we also have the second lowest wages in the country, and you have people working 2 and 3 jobs to not make it. And so, you know, with a lot of the jobs that we've seen come to Arkansas being centered in central Arkansas and northwest Arkansas, the rest of the state is feeling it. So where you're talking about jobs and healthcare and those kinds of things that Chintan's been talking about and is going to continue to talk about, and especially education, I just think that you're going to see a different race. I think you're going to see some different responses, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
And he's a young man. I'm
Very
looking forward,
much.
like you, to hearing more from him.
New
as
blood,
this race,
energy and new
unfolds.
blood.
Yeah.
That's right.
Always
Yeah.
good to see that. Okay, 2nd congressional district, as you mentioned, Roby French Hill seeking his 3rd term. A 4-way Democratic primary in this particular race. Clark Tucker, 2 teachers, Paul Spencer and Gwen Combs, Jonathan Dunkley from the Clinton School of Public Service, and then an independent as well, Natasha Birch Holsey. Let's handicap the Democrat field first. It's a pretty impressive bunch of people here.
You know, I know 3 of the candidates pretty well, and like them all. And when you look at the positions of all of them, you know, they're all pretty progressive. They're all pretty strong in their own right. However, then when you go beyond that and you look at experience, you look at funding, you look at sort of energy that comes from youth, you know, I think that Clark Tucker wins it hands down.
Jonathan.
I'll disagree with you a little bit on that. I think that one's going to be a free-for-all. I mean, I do think that Clark is got the political pedigree, and he's got the right things in place to make that a race that he would win. But I would not underestimate Gwen Combs and the grassroots movement that she's part of. Paul Spencer has been out there on the campaign trail for a while, has done a lot on the ethics front, and they've all got great candidacies. Things to kind of position themselves on.
That's what I said.
I think there'll be a runoff in that race.
Throughout this conversation, you've talked about the importance of funding.
Yep.
So you can't say in one race where.
But I think that race goes to a runoff. I'm not sure somebody wins that one.
And you know, Jonathan Dunkley would be the first African American sent to Congress from Arkansas, which is.
For sure.
Which is mind-blowing. What about French Hill? What's his standing with voters in this district that can sometimes seem to go either way?
Yeah, I think that this 2nd congressional district race of the 4 is clearly the showpiece of what political, folks want to look at and think where all the action's going to happen. I do think that Clark Tucker is probably the one that emerges. I do think that at the same time, with 4 Democrats in that race, it very likely goes to a runoff. Obviously, the Democrat has to exhaust a lot of resources both in the primary and then in the runoff. I think that plays against them a little bit. I think Democrats really want this seat back. I think there'll be a concerted effort both in state and out of state to try to do that. For me, it's a math question as to whether or not they can, because personally, I think Clark Tucker becomes, if he's the nominee, I think he becomes probably the best candidate that Congressman Hill has faced. I think he's got a lot of upside in that race, but at the same time, going out and winning Pulaski County and hanging on to the rail and hoping you don't get wiped out everywhere else, that's the challenge for Democrats in this seat. If you kind of go back and look at historic vote there, if you're going to get creamed outside of Pulaski County, you got to be running 62, 63% in Pulaski County to win. I think with some of the pockets of Republican votes, especially in the West, but also north of the river, there's some Republican strongholds that have emerged there. I think it becomes harder to get 62.
A lifetime of community relations that does cross some party lines in Pulaski County that gives him some built-in.
I think if French Hill gets 42%,
when Clark Tucker was not in the race, with some very similar overlapping relationships, that coupled with, Hill's voting record in an area, in a district that has traditionally trended very strongly Democratic, I just don't think that you can overlook that. And I think that there has been a groundswell of folks who do like French and thought that he would be the voice of reason. And when, you're voting against aid to Puerto Rico,
right.
It just kind of makes folks go, wait a minute, who is this? And I've heard that. And I've heard that. Too, so, and the other thing that you can't discount is the voice of young voters, which has typically been missing and will not be missing this election. And so in a district where you've got several colleges and universities, many students who I believe will turn out in a way that they have not since President Obama's election and or before, I think will figure into this race in a different way for the Democratic nominee, who I believe will be Clark. The 2nd district could have been a lot more Democratic when they redistricted in 2010. They tried to move Jefferson County into the 2nd district. That would have cemented that as a Democratic district.
Well, I checked 2 of those, or 3 of those crystal ball sites. 2 of them had this as one of them had it as a solid Republican seat, but 2 of them said a likely Republican seat. So we'll see which way that goes. The 2nd district will be a lot of fun to watch. 3rd congressional district, Steve Womack being primaried, but primaried from the left, it seems, Roby. Rob Ryerson being backed by a progressive group. What's that all about?
He's kind of been a mystery candidate to me. We've had a little bit of dialogue back and forth. I've tried to connect with him a few times and learn a little bit more about his candidacy, but his website was down for a lengthy period of time a couple of months ago. I just haven't been able to really connect with him and learn a whole bunch about it.
How about just the concept of a more progressive Republican in Northwest Arkansas? How does that work?
The politics are changing up there, but I don't know if they're changing for a less conservative Republican.
I think progressives even probably kind of delicate when you're talking about Rob Ryerson. I don't think he identifies with the electorate in the 3rd district at all. I've actually heard that there's a group of candidates like him in a couple of different seats that are being run out of a kind of opposition Republican operation, I don't think he gains any traction. I think that obviously Congressman Womack is equipped to win that race. He obviously has to deal with that as competition, but I don't really see the real threat there.
77% of the vote for him back in 2016, right. But again,
I would
a
agree with Roby. There's some changing views.
Josh Mahoney, though, is a good Democratic candidate, though. He's a young, progressive,
right.
Grassroots organizer. He reminds me a lot of Chinton. He reminds me a lot of Gwen Combs. He reminds me a lot of Hayden Shamel down in the 4th District, which we haven't talked to yet. He's got a following, and they'll be active, and I think that they'll. It's running against a guy in your first race that served several terms and has got a lot of political experience. It will be an uphill battle for him. Plus the 3rd District's politics. We haven't voted for a Democrat in the 3rd District since before John Paul Hammersmith. So.
But you also have to look at the changing demographics of that region and how, so many people who have moved to the 3rd District to work for Walmart. And, that's changing the demography of that area. And I think that we have to look at that, as well as, the growing population of Hispanics that we're seeing in the Springdale area. Yeah. And that has continued to grow. And a lot of the folks who immigrated to the 3rd District have now grown up. And so that's something that we can't look past, coupled with a very strong, Democratic contingent who are super active. And I just think that you're going to see some change in that area as well.
I think the margin of victory is probably narrower than Steve Womack would prefer, but I still got to give him the edge at this point. Okay. So we'll see.
So while Womack is being primaried from his left, Bruce Westerman seems to be being primaried from the right. Randy Caldwell, a pastor, he echoes a lot of the president's language, draining the swamp, securing the borders. How is that going to be a legitimate challenge to Bruce Westerman?
I don't think so. I think I'm kind of surprised. I didn't know that he was coming from the right. I mean, I don't think Bruce Westerman really has a whole lot of room there to the right on a lot of issues. I mean, you kind of sometimes see the delegation break on things like the debt limit and other issues.
And Bruce is still over there.
Bruce is usually the one that's pretty far to the right on those. That is not coming and going, well, we got to get this done. I mean, he stands on certain principles that I think are pretty right. So it kind of surprises me that someone's coming from that direction. Yeah. I don't think that's a successful effort. I'd
like to hear his arguments for what he's got a bone to pick with him. So I'd be curious what the issues are.
Yeah. Hayden Shamel, I know you've had her on your program. Tell us about her.
She's very sharp. Education background, very active in Garland County politics. I think what impressed me about her just in the interview that we did a few weeks ago, just genuine. I mean, when you talk to her, you feel like you're talking to a young mother. You feel like you're talking to a teacher, yes. Someone that cares about kids. And I just think you see it sometimes in some politicians. They just have a natural, personal connection with people, and it's comfortable when it's for real. And I think Hayden Shamel is one of those candidates. I haven't seen a lot of them over the years that just personally just kind of genuinely come across as the real deal in terms of I'm not trying to be somebody I'm not, and so I think that will come through for her on the campaign trail. I think she will grow and get better and better as a candidate the more time she spends out there working in that district.
I think the other thing about her is that she is super hardworking, and she has an incredible legion of volunteers working for her. And when you get a legion of women, especially working that hard and, working based on a message and a platform that has to do with education and their kids and their families, I think Westerman better watch out. And I think that different from really all of the other congressional districts, I think that Congressman Westerman is a lot more vulnerable just in terms of name ID. He's been very quiet. There are a lot of folks, and maybe this is just specific to Jefferson County, but a lot of people not only don't really know who he is, but just feel that there's not a lot of responsiveness or outreach.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I
and
would
you know,
s-
Pine Bluff for a long
Sure.
time was always home to a congressional office. So,
Yeah, but I would say I do see Bruce Westerman work in the district quite a bit. It may not be Jefferson County, but I do get his travel schedule, and he stays pretty busy working the district. I still think the 4th Congressional District is still a conservative-leaning district when you look at just the numbers of where it's gone over the last couple of years. But it wasn't
over the
that
last
long
couple
ago.
of years, though.
It wasn't that long ago that Mike Ross
Right, I
represented
mean-
that, and
Right,
even
right.
in a wave election of 2010, when Mike Beebe survived and all the other congressional seats went Republican, the 4th District held on as a Democratic seat by 17 points.
right.
So-
And so I think, too, when we're thinking about the Republican wave, which I think has come to a screeching halt right now, I think that you can't disconnect that wave from President Obama, who is no longer president. So I think when we look at this, you know, you have to make the point that you just made and look at the 4th District a little differently. And even in the demographic composition, I think that it really is one of the more winnable seats in Congress, second only to the 2nd
I
District.
will say, too, it's also the district that elected Jay Dickey the same year that Arkansas voters put Bill Clinton in the White House by 70% margin. It went for Jay Dickey
Right,
in that
we're not-
4th District, too.
right.
So it's like...
Even though I didn't vote for him,
I know, but it
we're
was
not
just-
scared.
The 4th
okay?
District can do a little bit of anything. It goes all over the place. So.
All right. We only have about 5 minutes left. Why don't we do this one last race? Let's take a look. The race for the Arkansas Supreme Court. Tell us about it,
All right,
Roby.
this is a statewide Supreme Court position that is currently held by Courtney Goodson. She serves as the Supreme Court Justice. I can't remember the exact position. I want to say position 6, but I may be wrong on that. She's being challenged by David Sterling, who ran against Attorney General Leslie Rutledge in the Republican primary 4 years ago. He lost in a runoff to her, but he is still around in politics. And then Judge Kenneth Hickson is on the Court of Appeals. He's out of Northwest Arkansas, and he's thrown his hat in the ring too. So the Supreme Court race sets up a little bit differently than the primary and the general elections, in that the primary race for the Supreme Court will be on May 22nd, like everybody else's. But if there's a runoff in this race, it's the general election date in November. So there won't be a runoff 3 weeks later for the winner, the 2 winners of this race right here, if it goes to a runoff. And so we'll see what happens with the Arkansas Supreme Court. This one will be I think a rousing one. Again, we saw a lot of dark money come into the Supreme Court race 2 years ago against Courtney Goodson, and we've seen it in favor of David Sterling in the past as well in the Attorney General's race. So could be a lot of fireworks in this race.
Yeah, 2 years ago, she ran for Chief Justice against Judge Ann Kemp, lost that race, but she was, as Roby mentioned, the target of a lot of money being spent by some conservative groups. Robert, do we think those same groups are going to be back this time around?
You know, it's hard to predict that kind of stuff. Yeah, you know, they came in pretty hard after her last time, spent a lot of money. I mean, a lot of gross ratings points against her. I think voters probably remember a lot of that. You know, sometimes your ballot effort lasts a while and sometimes it doesn't. I think this is probably one of those times where voters do remember some of that. I tend to think that, you know, I think she got 42% the last time out. I mean, that's a pretty vulnerable position to start with. I think anybody would acknowledge kind of that weakness. So obviously you've seen 2 other people get in the race. I don't know that people saw this being a 3-way race as it developed, but I think there was, you know, clearly some folks that thought that this was a winnable race and that they had different things to bring. Obviously David's been on the ballot before, so he might have some name ID. I don't know how much is really left over. We'll see. Judge Hickson from Northwest Arkansas has been on a couple of times, hasn't run statewide. So, you know, to me, I think it very possibly goes to a runoff, and you may end up with you may see dark money early. You may see dark money wait and see what shakes out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to
And
know.
I think, too, in judicial races, and y'all back me up on this, if you have the word justice or judge in front of your name, it is an advantage to be on the ballot. And so Justice Courtney Goodson, Judge Kenneth Hickson, and David Sterling won't have judge in front of his name. This may be a year where not having judge in front of your name is an advantage. You know, we don't know what people are thinking necessarily, but you know, there's a good possibility that when they see judge and justice that there could be some decisions if they don't know the other candidates that well. So
All right. Well, a lot more discussion to come between now and May 22nd when the primary is scheduled to be held and the general election on November 6th. I'm sure we'll all be talking a lot between now and then.
Yeah, I think that we're planning on coming back after
Great.
the primaries and doing a little bit more on something like this. So hopefully you guys could join us for that. I would just want to remind everybody too that you can register to vote in the May 22nd primary up until April 23rd, right?
Yes.
Am I right?
Get
Am I right?
registered. Do it.
Yes.
Do it. Early voting starts May 7th.
Always very important to
keep the
get
dates.
registered and ready to go.
Got to keep the dates.
We thank you all for being here with
Great
us
to be
tonight. It's
here.
been a great discussion.
All
Thanks
right,
so
great.
much. And we encourage you to get out and vote. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. Of course, stay with KATV for the very latest on Decision 2018. I'm Chris May. Good night.